So, first of all, thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate the fact that you're tuning into this. And I'm going to take you through what hopefully will give you some decent ideas as to where you can save 300% of your time. And I was like, really? 300% of your time? Is that what I can deliver for you? But that is my aim, to give you some tactics that will increase what you do, therefore reduce the amount of time that you spend doing it. And by the way, I'm going to give you some guaranteed increases on your successful decisions. You might think, how on earth am I going to do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to take you through what's known as the dreaded drama triangle. Sounds dramatic. I think it's amazing. But understanding what your type is in the dreaded drama triangle, because what you'll see there is that you might think you're leading in one way, but actually you're leading in a different way, and the impact that has on the amount of time that you're spending. So as well, part of that, I also want you to actually understand the impact of your words, because through this presentation, I'm going to give you some amazing questions that you can take into your everyday working life that should hopefully speed up the amount of time you're spending on doing something, or you're spending while you're leading. So the impact of your words is vitally important to take away from this. And so as part of that, I want you to have the tools to be able to elicit a different response. So some of the things that you no doubt recognize as a leader is how many times you have to take something, and therefore how many times, how much time it takes out of your day to kind of go, oh, crikey, you know, if only I'd bloody listened and did this the first time. So as part of that, I'm going to give you some magic words. Love a little bit of magic, all right? But the magic words is what will take you to the next level and help you to reduce that time to give you 300% more. And then, rather than it just being me telling you this, there's actually some amazing research. So I'm going to give you the why. I'm going to talk you through the research that explains that these slight changes, to understand where you are in the triangle, to understand how you interact with other people in the team, why that's important to change, that will elicit this 300% more time and increase your success rate on decisions by apparently 35%. So here we go, the dreaded drama triangle. Now, one of the things that you have on the dreaded drama triangle is a persecutor. And as a boss, you probably will not accept that you are a persecutor. However, I 100% know that every one of you will be able to identify at some point during your careers somebody who's been a persecutor. And when I talk about a persecutor, I'm talking about somebody who's quite often angry. You know, the type of person where you kind of think, am I really going to have to speak to them because they're so aggressive? And I know that no matter what I do or what I say to them, they're going to be judgmental. And when you tie all of those things together, it's how they come across as a bullying type person. And they're often somebody that's really demanding. You know, there's a balance between setting high expectations and demanding that every single thing is achieved or done. And in which case, they then quite often come across as spiteful and scornful as to the fact that those things that you've said you're going to do have not been achieved. So what was the point? Why have I spent my time telling you to do this? Will you just bloody listen and get it done? That type of person often comes across in some industries. I would suggest all industries. It's almost what you perceive as the old style boss. But what I think you might recognize yourselves as is far more as a rescuer. You're the type of person that wants to really look after the team. You're the type of person that's got that big arm to go around your shoulder and go, I've got you, don't worry about it. You're the type of person who's often self-sacrificing. You know, you put yourself behind others. You kind of bring them out and try and assist in the best way that you can while putting yourself second. Often, there's a rescuer is over helpful and facilitating. You know, really want us to get this done together as a team. Come on, what can I do to help? They like to be needed. It's that bit as a rescuer. You're somebody who can be relied upon. always relied upon. And when you are therefore needed, sometimes you're prone to meddling because you want to kind of micromanage. You want to be in that, yes, I'm going to put my arm around your shoulder, but we need to get this done. And therefore it can come across as quite engulfing. You know, again, if you think about some of the bosses that you've had and how they come across, sometimes it's that blanket that's coming over is just too thick. So the issue is that both the persecutor and the rescuer create a victim. So it doesn't matter if you're the type of person that gets shouted at and you're the victim that responds, you know, oh, crikey, I'm still a victim because I hate being shouted at. Or actually, if you're somebody that's being rescued, constantly rescued, you know, it's no different than the Hollywood blockbusters. There's a victim there that needs rescuing. So bizarrely, when you're thinking about the triangle and how this can come across, both the persecutor and the rescuer end up with the same situation. And the victim, though, is often manipulative, especially with a rescuer, because they want the rescuer to do their work. Why should they bother doing their work if they can get the rescuer to do it for them? Quite often in the poor me syndrome, you know, oh, woe is me, you know, I'm in this situation again. I can't believe it. I need somebody to help me get out of this situation. And therefore, they come across as quite helpless and needy, often complaining and whinging. You know, when you think you're leading a victim, it can be really challenging, really time consuming. So when I talk to you about the fact that we're going to get 300% more time, one of the ways is recognizing if you're treating somebody as a victim. Because if you are treating somebody as a victim, they will suck the life out of you. They will take so much of your time with their downtrodden ways and how they'll always blame others that you kind of go, well, crikey, you know, how am I going to get out of this? And so you kind of think, am I a rescuer? Am I the type of boss that wants to have their arm around them? Or am I the type of boss that wants to really persecute them? Whichever one you are, the dreaded drama triangle from Stephen Cartman is created. You've got the victim. And so the challenge is, how do we flip this? Because nobody wants to be rescuing all the time because it's stressful. Nobody wants to be really persecuted because they don't want to come across as that person. We almost definitely don't want to see ourselves as victims. So the flip. Taking that flip is called the empowerment dynamic from David Emerald. And it's turning the victim into being a creator. And it's turning the persecutor into being a challenger. And it's turning the rescuer into being more coach. And hopefully, when you recognize that these things are what you can flip it into, then this is where you can save most of your time. And when you're a creator, it's somebody who steps into the ownership of the problem and thinks about what options you have on solving the problem. I'm going to come to transactional relationships and how you interact as a creator if somebody still wants to rescue you or somebody wants to persecute you. But ultimately, as a creator, it's a very different mindset than being a victim, because you're saying, I own this. And so to be more creator, you might kind of ask yourself first, and this is where it's like that self-management bit that's so important. Where have I researched to help me solve this? And then how do I articulate the outcome that I'm looking to achieve? Because if you go to somebody with a problem, you know, what we're ingrained in us, if somebody comes to us with problems, is we want to solve problems. But the trouble with solving problems is we're rescuing. So instead, if we think of a creator of going to somebody with a problem, we go to somebody and we say, this is the outcome that I'm looking for. This is what I want to achieve. This is what I've looked at or I've researched to solve this. And the most important bit, these are the obstacles I'm facing in this problem. Because if you know the hurdles that you need to get over, wow, that's a really big step. What do you need for this outcome is to get past these hurdles. And once I'm past these hurdles, I know that outcome can be achieved. So if somebody comes to you in the creator mode or in a victim mode, how can we challenge them differently? And this is where there's a fine line between a challenger and a persecutor. And a challenger is that they come from a place of supportive learning. So they know that they're challenging, but then challenging with the intent of sparking the growth of the creator. So it's how they come across in a way that says, pretty much, I'm here for you, but I'm going to expect you to have the answers. I want you to articulate to me what outcome you want. I want you to say to me where you've researched. I want you to say to me about data. Because if we talk about data, it keeps emotion out of the conversation. And I'll come over to you in a moment when we talk about transactional relationships about emotion. But if you think from a persecutor point of view, they're very emotive because they're very cross. From a rescuer point of view, they're very emotive because they're very caring. They want to look after you. When you take the emotion out and concentrate on data in a business relationship, all of a sudden you can kind of go, I can now measure the success because I've got the data that tells me whether or not the things that I'm looking to achieve is going to be successful or not. And again, I'll come on to why the data is so important when we talk about how you can increase your successful decisions. So a slightly different spin is the coach. And the difference between a coach and a rescuer is more about the future. What do you see as the options to solving this challenge? Yeah, you're not specifically challenging them, you're more asking them more questions. And the more questions that you ask, the more curious that you are, the likelier it is that the victim, the creator, will therefore find their own answer. And actually, all you've done is encourage them to find that answer by asking them more questions. Because bizarrely, stay more curious takes more time. And therefore, we're happier to step back into being a rescuer because I can just give you the answer. But when you're just giving the answer, people don't retain it. Whereas if they think of the answer themselves, then all of a sudden, you're in a much different relationship. And therefore, you can drive the learning of this person through, which ultimately will take less time away from you. So to be more coach, think again about asking those questions about outcomes. What is that outcome you want to achieve? And then more importantly, about the options to achieve that outcome. Because when you start talking about options and express the difference between the easiest option and the hardest option, and then what other options, the really deep thinking comes once you've articulated what one option might be in comparison to the extreme opposite option, and then talk about more options in the middle. And then that bit that takes you into action, that's what's the first step you could take to achieve your outcome. Because a lot of people procrastinate, especially victims. They don't know what they want to do, and therefore they don't want to take that first step. And so quite often from a coaching conversation, when we're talking about somebody who's stuck, ask them that simplest question, what's the first step you can take? Will shift that procrastination into action. So I mentioned interactional relationships. Love interactional relationships because they go on throughout our life and not just our working environment. And quite often what you get is a parent speaking to a child in a working environment. The reason you get a parent speaking to a child is because we're expected to be the boss. And in our home lives, the parent, when you've got a young child, is the boss. So a parent, bizarrely, can come across in two ways that are not dissimilar to the dreaded drama triangle. And you can get a very critical parent, which you'll see is very similar to the persecutor. It's somebody who's lecturing, somebody who's judging, somebody who's talking about traditions, criticizing you when you've not done something right, or you should do it like this, don't do it like that. Now in life, we need a critical parent. because we need somebody to say to us, don't put your hand in the fire, it's going to get burned. And sometimes that translates into certainly industry, especially a legal or a financial industry, because you might break the rules, you might break the law, and therefore don't do it. So sometimes you need to adopt that critical parent approach, but there's a different way of doing it that takes you into being more adult. And I'll come to that in a minute. But recognizing ourselves as a critical parent, especially with traditions, is where we make our biggest time saving. Because we talk about, well, we've always done it like this. And when we've always done it like this, what impact does that have? Got some examples of that in a minute. On the opposite end of the scale to the critical parent, we get a nurturing parent. And again, when you look at the nurturing parent, consoling, sympathetic, advising, guiding, taking care of, it's no different than the rescuer. You know, we're in this situation here where I've got my arm around you. I want to look after you. You know, I'm going to get you through this. Don't worry. You know, you can always come to me with the answer. Sorry, with the question. I've always got all the answers. You know, you're in that position, and it's a very nice position to be in because it's nice to be wanted. And therefore, how do I step away from that? Because I still want to be nice, just don't want to be needed, because being needed takes up an awful lot of time. So if you recognize when you're responding to somebody asking you questions as, am I consoling? Am I being too advising? Am I taking care of? And therefore, am I being too much of a parent? Because being a parent creates a child. And it might be that we have an adapted child that responds, and it might be manipulative, but more often than not, they're submissive and conform to adult expectations. This can be a real challenge when you're trying to drive the development of either an individual or a team, is if you're telling them something, then they'll just do as they're told. They'll just conform to what's expected of them. And in a lot of ways, that misses the major elements of growth within the company. Because if you've not got people who can actually challenge and respond in an adult way, then what you're driving is the company is just going to be based on you. You're going to tell people what to do, they're going to do it. So it can be challenging with an adapted child. It can be more challenging with the natural child. As a natural child, playful, impulsive, curious, creative, fun, rebellious. You know, the natural child really, really wants to play up to you as a parent. And that can be the worst type of employee that you can have, because they just infuriate you. But if you're not recognizing that the reason that they're infuriating you is because you're acting as a parent, then they're never going to change. That relationship that you have with them when you're in parent mode, boss mode, will create this, I'm just going to mess around here. I'm just going to rebel against what I'm being told. So what I've tried to do is take this into a couple of situations that might ring a bell as to what you're delivering in the company. So you might have heard, you should never speak to customers like that. And what you'll get is a child responding, well, you weren't the one speaking to the customer. So you say what you want, but I'll do it my way. Yeah. How many times have you seen that in an employed situation? Or even been on the receiving end of somebody being the customer that's complaining and hearing the boss having a go at the person, telling them that they should never speak like that. Perhaps another example would be more from the nurturing parent or the rescuer point of view. Let me tell you why we've always done it this way. Traditions. We've always done it this way. You can say what you want, but I'll do it my way. Because believe it or not, you know, if everyone in the team has found a shortcut in some form or other. So the boss parent might be thinking we've always done it one way, whereas the rebellious child will have already found the shortcut. And you've lost grip. You've no idea what your process is. It's broke. And the more it's broke, the more time it sucks out of you as a manager to then have to make more decisions on how to fix it. you might get a slightly different response from an adaptive child. The adaptive child might just go, okay, yeah, whatever. You've told me what to do. I'll just say it exactly as you want me to say it. They've lost the fight. And certainly I've experienced in my career when I've felt exactly like that. I'll just do what you tell me to do. What's the point of actually responding anymore? And the trouble is now, as I reflect back to when I had that type of attitude, I realize that the power is in my hands to change the person that's trying to just tell me what to do. Power's in my hands not to be the child. The power's for me to be the adult. And of course, what better adult than one drinking wine? That's what it's all about, isn't it? That's what makes us an adult. But to be more adult, we have to be objective. We have to take away our emotions and think about the data. And then from the data, what problem are we trying to solve? And is that rational? So it's that step back and almost some similar questions to what we've put in the dreaded trauma triangle to respond as an adult. So if I think that through and kind of focus on that, I'm going to speak to somebody else as an adult instead of either speaking to them as a parent or speaking to them as a child. Because ultimately, when we're speaking to each other as adults, that's when the best business gets done. That's when we make the swiftest decisions and the most successful decisions. So if I'm faced with that, you should never speak to customers like that, I could respond as an adult instead of the child by going, well, thank you for the feedback. Take the emotion out. Thank you for the feedback. Can you provide me with some examples of what to say if this situation arises again, please? Because if I respond in that type of approach, I've kept it focused on being data-driven. Are there other examples here? I'm thinking about the future. I'm not thinking about the now. And therefore, I'm not responding in an argumentative way. So I'm taking the emotion out. And I'm asking for examples. So while I'm not submitting to the fact that the parent wants to tell me what to do, I'm saying effectively, that's fine, but give me some examples of what we could do differently here that will take this forward. And if it's more the parent that's trying to nurture me, let me tell you why we've always done it this way. Well, thanks. Is there data available that supports this is the most efficient way, please? Because sod's law, that parent could well have been doing something for years, not realise why themselves. It's just that they were told that that's the way we should do it. But staying in that adult mode instead of responding as a child drives the decision-making in a speedy way. Because as soon as you can articulate, well, what's the purpose? What's the data? What objective are we trying to achieve here? Then you get a different response. You might also identify a different response to that question. So thanks. If you looked at this objectively, would there be another way of doing it? Because what we kind of forget as a leader is to really step back out of our environment and go, are we doing this in the best way that we can? And if we're challenged by another adult, without trying to say you're doing this wrong, you're trying to say, okay, take that step away, look at it objectively, and is there another way of doing this? The challenge for a lot of people is to stop being the child as opposed to stop being the parent. Because if you're a parent, you can recognize I'm doing this and I need to be more adult. The challenge is for the child to respond. And one way of doing that might be to adopt this approach throughout the company and say, I'm aiming at adult level here. So I'm trying to be objective when I ask you this question. And bizarrely, when you communicate as a team that this is what you're aiming at, and everybody understands the parent-adult-child interaction, then all of a sudden you can communicate better and the team responds quicker, and therefore you save time. So I promised you some magic, right? The magic's crackers because the magic is dead simple. And the magic words come from a guy called Michael Bungay Stanier. And if you've not seen the Advice Monster TED Talk, it's the best 15 minutes you can spend. Because Michael comes up and he says, stay curious, And when somebody comes to you with questions, be awesome. And when you're being awesome, it provides a load of magic. But to be awesome, it's really just an acronym. And the acronym is and what else? And I love that we can be awesome, because as soon as you say to somebody, and what else, you stay curious, and you can then stay in that mindset of being in adult mode a lot easier. Because if you're thinking about the solution, you've already stepped into being a rescuer, or you've stepped into being a persecutor. But instead, if you stay curious and say, yeah, but and what else? So as some examples, and I promised you could take these away, I'll share the slides if you want them afterwards. When somebody comes to you and says, what's the outcome you want to achieve? Adult mode. The and what else would be quite simple. Are there any other outcomes? Because when you deliver something different into a business, there might be some unexpected outcomes. And until you challenge the and what else, then you don't know, because nobody's thought of it, because everybody's aiming at one outcome. And when they're aiming at that outcome, they might forget about other options to achieve the outcome. And just asking, what else? As to are there any other options? Wow, you won't believe what happens. The challenge, and the biggest challenge, and I suffer so much with this, and you all know how much I talk, is being silent. Because when you ask what else, and then you provide the answer, you've broke it. You've really got to give people the silence in order to think it through. Almost make it uncomfortable, because the silence can really drive the deep thinking. And then when you think about the steps that you're going to take to achieve your outcome from the challenger, a really good question is, and what's the second step? Because you're already thinking ahead. And the more you can develop this way of asking more, the quicker your decisions are going to be. Because instead of spending time defending those decisions, you've moved those decisions on already by considering them. So some other examples that you might use: what learning opportunity have you identified? And then are there any other learning opportunities here? And I've used those words specifically instead of going problem. What problem have you identified? Are they only other problems here? Because as soon as you stop thinking about problems and start thinking about learning opportunities, the mindset shifts. And the mindset shift is massive, because people stop defending decisions. They stop defending why things have always been done this way in the traditional world. And then when you add to that about the data, then wow, it just blows your mind. Because if you're saying, what's the learning opportunity that you've identified, and what's the data showing you on that learning opportunity, you can then say, is this the decision that I want to focus on at the minute? Because the data might show you, actually, it won't make that big a difference. Now, you might be in the marginal gains mindset of, so there's Brett said, get me tongue going, Sir Dave Brailsford, and that marginal gain might be really small. And so the data that you're focusing on might be as simple as Dave puts it, just smile. That's the smallest marginal gain. But when you think about the data and what that data you want to show you as a leadership team, when somebody's coming to you and showing you the amount of data that they've got and how they're expecting the decision to change that data for the positive, you can A, measure the success, and ask, are there any other measures that will highlight your success? But it will also then provide you with the opportunity of going, is that the time, is that the decision that we want to spend the next bit of our time on? Because the data might show you that the increase in time or the increase in revenue or the increase in profitability might be really small. And there might be a bigger fish over here that's not been identified because somebody's got the idea but hasn't looked at the data. So back to those bits as an individual, as opposed to just thinking about us as leaders. But if you asked yourself these questions every time you've got a learning opportunity, it's going to speed up your decision making. So where have I researched to help me solve this? And therefore, are there any other places I could research? I've done a quick search on the interweb and I've come up with this, but actually I've not delved into the website that gives me this data or gives me this information, so I can research in more depth. And then think about what you actually are trying to articulate the outcome to be. And could you articulate it in a different way? You know, the best advice I ever got was be succinct. So when you think about, I'm telling a story here that's supporting why I need to achieve this outcome, can you reduce it? Can you put it into one sentence, two maximum? Makes a real impact on what you're trying to do, and you can really strip it back. Nowadays, you can put in what you're trying to achieve in ChatGPT and ask it to provide you with a synopsis. You know, lo and behold, you've got a bullet point instead of, you know, 5 paragraphs on what you're trying to do. And then think about those obstacles, because if you've put one obstacle in front of you and then you hurdle that obstacle, well, you might be running the Grand National, there might be another 39 fences to get over. So try and think through all the obstacles before you actually crack on and make the decision to push it further. So, promised you why, promised you it's not just me telling you this, right? And you're not going to believe this. When you think about why, the data that's out there is proper research, and it's proper research that's been undertaken by a guy named Paul Nutt. It's a quarter of a century ago. I thought I was a great boss in 1999. Turns out I knew rubbish all. You know, and you kind of think, okay, what happened in that quarter of a century? Because a quarter of a century ago, he spent a lot of time and effort looking at this, and he's made a massive conclusion. And his conclusion you can put into 2 sentences. If you tell subordinates what's wanted, it liberates them to look for answers. If I'm finding problems, it alerts subordinates to take defensive action. That was mind-blowing for me. And you kind of think I should have read this in 1999. It was done a lot, saved me a lot of time throughout my career. But it's about communicating that vision. What do I want us to achieve? What's the outcome that I'm looking for? Okay, as a team, this is the outcome that we're looking for. How do we get there? As soon as you start saying to them, you've got a problem here, then they're going to take defensive actions. They're going to go, yeah, but, you know, we've always done it that way. Or actually, you know, 20 years ago, we decided that that's what we were going to do, you know, and therefore tough. I heard a story about, a bizarre story, a family story where somebody had cut the back off a joint to get it into an oven. And they always did it. And so the mother was there, and he checked in with the mother. Why do you always take the back off that joint? Oh, we've always done it. And the grandmother was there. Why is this the family tradition that you take the back off the joint? We don't have to. It's just we had a really small pan that year, so we had to get it in. So everything that you've always done as a tradition could be really hampering you. And as soon as you therefore tell people, this is what we want to achieve, and everybody gets on the same page and it looks to what we want to achieve, and stop telling them that there's problems. And Paul Nutt did this by analysing 356 decisions made by senior managers, and he analysed it over 2 years to determine the success. So you kind of go, that's a lot of decisions that he analysed there. And he came to that conclusion. Where there's a problem, there's blame, which equals energy spent on protecting the backs and interests of the people who made that decision. And I cannot stress enough to you the outcome of his work. Where there's a vision of what is wanted to be achieved, there's progress. As leaders, we don't have to have all the answers. And as soon as we accept we're not rescuers, we don't have to have all those answers, then wow, bang, you can now achieve so much more. Ask more questions. So as part of his research, he identified that bit that I've said to you in relation to data. Because once you make a decision, if you're saying that's a black and white decision and stays in stone, your chances of success are not as strong as if you measure what change is being created by the intervention, and that turns to progress. Measure it again, and measure it a third time. Because the more you keep measuring the impact of any change, the more you can improve your decision making. And certainly, managers who did not impose a solution but highlighted the need to act reduced the decision times by 300%. Because if you were only doing problem solving, i.e. you were making the decisions, you basically had a 1 in 2 chance of being successful in your decision making. Which is crazy, isn't it? If you step back and go, apply some of these questions that stops me being a rescuer or a persecutor, and be more coach, be more visionary. We need to act. This is what we need to achieve, but don't tell them how to achieve it. Ask them how they think it can be achieved. Then you're saving 300% of your time as a leader. Adopting that approach turns your problem-solving decision-making from a 55% success rate to a 70% success rate. Now, I promised you a bigger return than that. And the way to get that up to a 90% decision-making success rate is by adopting that intervention, measuring the implementation of the objective, gave a 90% increase in your success of decision-making. You're just like, boom! You know, that just blows your mind. You've not done anything different other than ask a few questions and set the vision and almost ask for help yourself as to how that can be achieved as a team. The key point is, don't just stop at one option. You know, back to the magic, and what else? Because it cannot stress enough how that opens the doors up for people's minds as to achieve more and more and more. It's phenomenal. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, go and watch Michael Bungay Stanier's TED Talk, and he'll explain and what else in even more depth than I have. But it's amazing. I've seen it in practice. And it really, you can almost see light bulbs going on when you ask what else, because people tell you the thing that's right there at the forefront of the mind because they've already thought it through. When you ask what else, they then need to go back here and think about what the other options are. And then you can actually analyze your decision making so much better. Thank you. That was my talk on how you can save more time. And hopefully you've got some skills now that you can take back into the business. And from there, you can adopt changes to yourself if you're recognizing yourself as a parent or perhaps as a child, how you can stop rescuing people and help them achieve more by just asking some questions, stay curious. And then sales pitch, this is me. You know, if you want me to come in and deliver some facilitation days, I've got full-on leadership training days. We're pulling the team together, looking at things like strategic planning, keystone conversations, how to save more time, actually understanding the difference between leadership and management, how to think more about how you communicate a vision, things like that. And give me a shout, I'm here. Other than that, if you've got any questions, I would love to hear from you in the chat. And there we go, stop sharing. Brilliant. Awesome. Cannot thank you enough for joining me, guys. It's really appreciated.
Thanks very much, Craig. That was great.
Yeah, thanks for that, Craig.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Nice
you.
one.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys. Hopefully I'll see you all soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank
Cheers,
you. Bye.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye.